Well, as is normal, we didn't speak at all before tonight, so the lesson he picked is spot on perfect. I noticed at least a half a dozen points that are like identical to points that I had planned for tonight. So, phrased differently. So what I say will still make sense, and we'll shine a little bit different light on the lesson of Hamid Bey. And you brought up the most perfect reason for all this, and that is it's not about just the little missteps in life that we're talking about. We're talking about when all seems lost, when it seems like you're in the middle of chaos and everything is going wrong. What do you do in that situation? How do you approach it? And the lesson brought up the idea of worry is not a good thing. And I would probably add to that a little bit in that we believe, or at least I believe, and I know some of you also believe, that our thoughts create our experiences. And if we allow ourselves to worry, to focus on the negative, guess what we're creating? We're going to create more negative. So if we can shift our mind from the negative to something that's positive, no matter how small it is, we can begin to create a more positive future for ourselves. So that's the whole reason for the talk tonight. And again, thank you for picking that lesson. It was absolutely perfect. So to kind of get into tonight's talk, there's a variety of different ways that we could look at any situation. There's looking at what it is, just as it is. We can look at where is the situation going, what is going to come as a result of this situation. And we can also look at what does this situation mean? What meaning is attached to it? And I have to say that in my experience of talking with people, the people that tend to have the hardest time in bad situations are the ones that look at what does this mean. I know some people who they'll call up a friend and the friend will say, hey, I'm really glad to talk with you. It's been ages. And then 5 minutes in the conversation, it seems like the friend is making an excuse to get off the phone. And then the person that I know would ruminate about that for a half an hour at least, or an hour, or days, or even a week. What does that mean? Did I do something wrong? Does that person not like me? Did I offend that person? Did I forget to do something and they're upset with me? And if they're going on about it for an hour or a day or a week or whatever, it's like the problem with focusing on what does something mean is that one thing does not have just one meaning. The example that I want to bring out is the color blue. If I say that I feel like I'm in a blue state, what does that mean? Someone give me an idea. Sad, melancholy, depressed. That's one meaning. What else could that mean?
Political state.
Okay, I'm not sure how to interpret that. Okay. Okay.
Kind of music. Kind of music.
Kind of music? Okay, blues music, okay. Okay. Let me throw out some other ideas. Blue can also be the color of healing, a color of cleansing. That's one way to interpret blue. I'm feeling like I'm being purified, I'm being cleansed. Blue can also be a color of peace and calm. Kind of goes into the depression, sadness kind of thing. There's also the idea of it just being a calming feeling. As I was preparing the talk, I realized there's another way of interpreting the color blue, and that is childhood fun. Especially when I remember kids coming up and talking, they got blue tongue because they were eating something that had a lot of blue food coloring in it. But blue could also mean childhood fun. The color blue can mean anything you want it to mean. And that's the problem with trying to associate meaning to events, is that it could mean anything. Going back to the conversation with a friend which only lasted 5 minutes, and they got off the phone. It's like, what does that mean? Well, does it mean that they're upset with me? Well, that's one possible meaning. Yeah, that could be, yeah. It could also mean that they had a meeting that they had to get to, and they just realized what time it was, and they didn't really want to go through all the detail of explaining why they had to get off the phone. Could mean that they had to go to the bathroom, were too embarrassed to tell you about it, and they just need to get off the phone. It could mean a lot of different things. So attaching meaning to events is probably the hardest thing to deal with, or it could be the easiest. It could be just that, okay, we need to attach a different meaning to this. What does it mean? What would you like it to mean? And in the case of like the friend getting off the phone conversation, what do you want it to mean? Do you want to get rid of that friendship? Okay, attach a meaning that they're upset with you and you'll end the friendship. Do you want it to be an ongoing friendship? Okay, attach a meaning that says that they just had to get out of the they were embarrassed to tell you what they really needed to do, and let it go at that. That's how you deal with meanings. At least the best I can approach in this talk tonight. I've got a lot more that I would like to talk about. Another way of approaching the negative situations in life is to think about, where is this going? What is the end result of the situation? And for this example, I want to bring up a story that I brought up before. Two farmers at a fence. I'm sure you've heard it one way or another. It's been a while since they've talked to each other. Now they're meeting at the fence. One farmer's asking the other, well, how's things going? Well, to get a little bit of the backstory, the farmer who's the main one in the story owns 2 horses, and by working those 2 horses morning till night, just barely makes enough food on the farm to sell and support his family, and it's a break-even situation, working morning till night, sun up to sundown. Well, first thing he says is, well, one of my horses ran away. Well, the other farmer says, oh, that's terrible. You're not going to have what you need to produce to feed your family. You guys are going to slowly starve to death. That's absolutely horrible. No, it isn't. Why is it not horrible? Well, it's true the horse ran away, but he brought 2 other horses with him. He came back home and he brought 2 other horses with him. That's wonderful news. You're going to have lots of extra time. You're going to be able to do lots more work. This is wonderful news. No, it isn't. Why is this not wonderful news? Well, my oldest son decided to tame one of the wild horses, was thrown off, broke his leg. Oh, that's terrible news. What does he say? No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's not terrible news. Why is it not terrible news? Well, the local militia came around recruiting all the able-bodied young men, passed up my son because of the broken legs, so he doesn't have to go to war. Oh, that's wonderful news. What does he say? No, it isn't. That's as much as the story as I know, but basically it keeps going forever. Every situation is neither terrible nor wonderful because it leads to something else. Whenever we're in a bad situation, one way that we can deal with it, one way that we could find a way of maintaining and not losing our head, is to think, this is going to lead to something else. And that something else could be something I really want. Don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to keep an open mind. That's one way to approach those negative situations. And in that, I will also bring up, some of you know that at one point in my life, I had lost everything, was homeless for a while, and let's just say I went through some bad situations. At the time, that was terrible. Now that I'm looking back at it, I'm actually thankful that things happened the way they did, because it set my life in a different direction. Had my life gone the way I had originally expected it to go, had none of that actually happened, I think I would be incredibly bored with myself and my life, because I was going into computer engineering, learning how to design computer circuits, and I would probably be Dilbert.
You are.
Okay, I accept that. There's something good in that statement. I have to look for it. But anyways, I'm thankful now for the bad things because of where they sent me, because of what they did to change the course of my life. That's another way of looking at when we're in a bad situation, where is it going? And it could go somewhere beautiful, we just don't know where. And then there's the situation of looking at a situation for what it is. Okay. At this point, I want to just double check my notes real quick, because I know that there are a few things that I skipped, but I think we're okay. Okay. Looking at the situation for what it is. Okay. Back in November, a group of us went to Egypt. The morning of November 9th, we landed in Egypt, and one of the first pieces of news that our group gets is that Trump was elected president. And for at least the next 10, 15 minutes, we were kind of waiting around for our luggage because the Guardian Travel folks were taking care of everything for us, and we didn't have to mess with the luggage or the customs or any of that kind of stuff. They were dealing with all that for us, but we were sitting and waiting for them to do that. Well, as we were waiting, most of the group was moaning and groaning about what does this mean? Where is this going? It's a bad situation. Well, eventually, after a little while, John and I were kind of trying to give people positive ideas to focus on. Where is the silver lining in all this? And one of the things I brought up is, well, we just passed over the Atlantic Ocean and we landed safely. We're in a good place right now. There's no terrorist in the airport. We're not being shot at. That's good. We're not being molested. That's good. A lot of good things were in that situation. It's a matter of what you choose to focus on. Pretty soon after that, Michael Joy brought up a reference to a story that I had heard one time before. And the story goes essentially that there was this science lab, and I can't remember which university it's supposedly from, but it doesn't really matter, that was studying, and even that's a little fuzzy right now, but here's what the experiment was. They took these two young boys, and they put them in this room that was full of horse manure. And they left them there for an hour. And after an hour, they come back to see how they were dealing with the situation. Well, as you'd expect, one of the boys was sitting in the corner crying because he didn't like that. And of course, when they asked him why was he crying, he's like, what do you expect? There's nothing to play with. There's all this shit around here. What do you expect? Why do you think I'm crying? Well, that was the expected part. The other boy, completely unexpected, was running around, jumping, laughing, having a ball, grabbing it, throwing the stuff all over the place. And he must have been doing that for a while because he was covered head to toe with it. And when they asked him, why are you so happy? And again, he's kind of looking at him like, well, why are you asking me? Look at all this. With so much shit around here, there's got to be a pony around here somewhere. He wasn't necessarily looking at what it was. He was looking at what it could mean, what could be associated with it. He was looking at other things related to the situation. But looking at the situation for what it is. Again, going back to the Egypt story, we were they're in a nice, clean, orderly environment, being treated well, safe, sound, relatively, for all intents and purposes, everything that we needed was there. We had every reason to be happy, but there was some news that some people didn't like that they chose to focus on for that moment. Okay, whatever. Let me make sure I don't lose track of where I'm at here. Okay, another example situation. Get off that topic, go to somewhere else. Let's take an example of the hot water heater in the basement springs a leak and floods the basement. Well, you'll look at that situation like, this is a mess. Yep, it's a mess. What's the good thing in this? Well, the basement floor got cleaned. That's one possible situation. Hot water heater, okay, that's gone, so we have an opportunity to upgrade. We buy something better. There's a lot of different situations that I could bring out with that. Computer goes out. Well, time to upgrade. Once you practice looking for those positive things in that situation, at first it may not be as easy as it could be, but after you do it for a while, it begins to get easier and easier and easier and easier. One of the things that Jim brought up in his talk last week that I want to bring forward again this week is that when life is tough, when life is a struggle, we can look at that as we are being trained. We are in a training program. Now, we can look at it as a school. We could look at it as basic training. We could look at it as training for a higher purpose. And at one time in my life, I considered this idea, and I was thinking, boy, I must be being prepared for some really high purpose because everything is so tough. And when you think about it, when people go into the military, there is one level of basic training that everybody gets. But those that have to go into special divisions have to go through even more training. And at some point, there is some division that's going to have more training than anybody else. Life trains us for our future missions by giving us problems to handle. And if nothing else, looking at where's the positive in a bad situation, if nothing else, you can always look at it and say, well, I must be developing some level of skill, training, some level of skill or strength from this experience that I will be able to use somewhere down the line. And if you notice, there seems to be a little bit of a pattern in all of these. It's looking at what could come up in the future, for the most part. So, boy, this is going a lot quicker than I thought. Of course, I am skipping a few things here and there, but that's okay. Okay, so looking at where things are going, looking at what things are, if we look at both of them together, what is this and what can we do with it? Then we get a third option. And this is an option that comes up often in the world of inventing. The 3M company at one time was working on a formula for a new type of glue that was going to be stronger than anything else that they had produced. Well, the scientists are working on their formulas, they're trying out different things and mixing up different batches of what this stuff is supposed to be. Well, there was one batch that they mixed up and they put it on stuff and it stuck for a while, but then you can pull it right back off again and it's stuck for a while and you can pull it back off again. They're thinking, boy, this isn't going to work at all. But then someone got creative and thought of putting that somewhat sticky stuff onto paper, and they made Post-it notes. one of the most successful products that company has ever produced. Because someone took what was a failure and came up with a creative use for it. At one time, root beer was intended to be a coffee supplement or a substitute. Let me try to say that right. At one time, root beer was supposed to be a coffee substitute, a way of helping people wake up in the morning without caffeine. Well, it didn't really take off. It was kind of a marketing flop as far as that goes, but they were able to turn it into a soft drink, and they're still selling it today because people liked it well enough for that. At one time in the history of radio and communications, they reached a point of using higher and higher frequencies of radio waves into what we now call microwaves. And they found out that there was a problem with the space around a microwave transmitter. And in attempting to solve the problem and create shielding so that nobody would get cooked next to it, again, someone with some creative thinking got the idea that, well, if we use this shielding material, create a little box, put the little microwave radiator in there, we can actually make something to cook food with. So they turned a problem into something that has benefited millions of people all the way around the world. A bad situation was turned into something good because someone decided to look at it with a creative eye. And that gets into probably my last way, well, it doesn't really get into, but it leads me to my last way of approaching a negative situation. And this is something else that you brought up in the lesson today. And that is, we can use the negative situation as an inspiration to get into prayer, to go to God, to tap into that divine essence that's within all of us, to change it. Because we can change those bad situations as long as we have faith in the power that God provides. Prayer can accomplish anything. Christ's mission here on earth was to prove the power of prayer. There was the water into wine miracle that was there, which is not really a new miracle. He wasn't the only one to do that type of thing. If you read back in the Old Testament, Elijah and the widow, that story, he took a little vial of oil, blessed that oil, and she used that little vial to fill barrel after barrel after barrel after barrel, which she was then able to sell and live comfortably for the rest of her life. So there are many different miracles that can be accomplished with the power of prayer. And in fact, one of the things that I'd like to get into, and I definitely have the time to do it, so let's go for it. One of the things that Christ did was to reframe the situation. There's a story about a small child that everyone said had just died. And he comes in and he says, no, she's just sleeping. She's just sleeping. Now, who knows whether she was just sleeping or whether she actually did die, but he was reframing the situation of, don't worry, it's not as bad as you think it is. Reframe your thoughts into something more positive and we'll just wake her up. And of course, she woke up and everything was good. Then there's the story of Lazarus, which he got into that town more than just a little late. I mean, they already had the funeral. And he said, okay, well, it's going to be okay. Get rid of that stone. Called out his friend. His friend walks out. The power of prayer, the power of God, the divine power that is within all of us, can be tapped to do all sorts of different miracles. And I want to mention again that it wasn't just Christ who was able to perform the miracles. It wasn't just his disciples, but anybody who had the faith that they could do that. Because there's a section in the Bible, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but at one point Christ is sending his disciples out to teach, to perform miracles, to do all sorts of things. And then they come back, and then he's sending out the disciples plus like 70 people to go out and do the same thing and to perform the miracles and do healings and all this other And then they come back and they tell him, Master, while we were out doing this, we noticed that there were other people also casting out demons, healing people, and all that in your name, but they're not part of our group. And he says, well, as long as they're not against us, they're for us, it's good. So what that tells me is that the power to perform the miracles was not something that Christ bestowed upon his followers. It was something that people were able to use because they believed, because they had the faith to call upon that divine power and use it for prayer. Now, the last bit in this that I want to mention is that Christ's mission was to prove to us that prayer can do literally anything. Anything. Not only was he able to heal, not only was he able to raise the dead, which is supreme healing, not only was he able to turn one substance into another, not only was he able to multiply food to feed thousands, but he did what I would consider to be the ultimate miracle. He raised himself from the dead. When you read through the New Testament, you will find a number of quotes where he's talking to people and he's saying, tear down this temple and in 3 days I will rebuild it. And there's a period of time in there where people were confused thinking that he meant the Temple of Jerusalem, but that's not what he was talking about. He was saying, tear down this temple and I will rebuild it. The story of him on the cross, there's a piece in there that a lot of people misinterpret. There's a lot of people that completely get the wrong message. And it's the quote where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And a lot of people think, well, he must have lost faith at that point. He must have been expressing human weakness at that point. But he wasn't. One of the things that Christ did consistently throughout his ministry was to quote lines from the Old Testament. And there's one particular, let's see here, just bring it up here. Okay, Psalm 22 starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Christ was referring to this psalm as a message to his followers. And if you read through this, I'm not going to take the time because I think I am starting to use up the time that I have. I suggest that you do read through it because the message there is, when all looks bad. I mean, David, as he's writing this, he's saying that everyone is out to get me. I'm starving to death. Nothing is going right in my life. And yet, as he's writing this prayer, essentially is what it is, as he's writing this prayer, as he's going through this, he's realizing that God, even though things look bad, God is always there. God has always been supporting us, no matter how bad it looks. In fact, that's one reason why Psalm 23, the one that follows it, goes into, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because God takes care of me. Right after Psalm 22, everything is so bad, where are you? And then Psalm 23, it's like, oh, everything is so wonderful. It's terrible, it's wonderful. Wait a minute, which one is it? No matter how bad things get, the power of prayer can always turn things around. As long as we have faith, and as long as we choose to believe in that divine essence that is within us. And with that, I thank you. I bid you good night.